Hi, I'm Naomi Alley, and welcome to Hera's Journey, a weekly podcast of personal transformation stories from the Soul Sisters' perspective and fittingly named after the goddess of women. For this inaugural episode titled Origin Story, I thought to share how this came to be and, of course, a little bit about myself. So, who am I? In full transparency, I'm a newbie in the podcast space and I'm learning as I go. It took me forever to find a intro song. So that will most likely change with each episode, perhaps. Don't know. That little ramble aside, I'm a purpose-driven mindset alchemist, transforming challenges into growth. I do just that as a leadership coach. I help strong women leaders get out of their way so that they can thrive through change. Why? Well, it has everything to do with the fact that I was a leader and let go from a corporate job. And I took the leap into entrepreneurship, and here I am. That's a journey story I will share in subsequent episodes. As for why a podcast, quite simply, I was craving conversation, particularly during COVID lockdowns. It stems from the sets of inspiring conversations I was having with different circles of friends, and the thought of how the advice shared and the stories told could have been really beneficial to our younger selves. Perhaps our warrior wounds and lessons learned could be insightful for someone. And in our COVID times, when women in particular are dealing with a number of compounded challenges, to put it mildly, that it might be helpful to hear stories about how other women have faced change. As for the name, it was in response to a friend sharing that Hero's Journey didn't resonate with her. So I jokingly said, let's call it Hera's Journey. The name just came to me. So after a quick search, I learned that she is the goddess of women, marriage, family, and childbirth. And so it was fated. The hero's journey, if you're not familiar, is that arc story. So very simply, the call that leads the reluctant hero on a quest. Along the way, there are friends, allies, mentors to help the hero through the inevitable challenge forged by that foe. And after successfully dealing with that challenge, the hero returns home transformed as a result of their journey. That's a Cole's Note version. I've just aged myself referring to Cole's Notes, but if you're curious to learn more about the hero's journey and the arc story, feel free to look that up. And so this podcast aims to share the story leading up to and after the wake-up call, the burning need for change. There's a famous quote from Maya Angelou. The need for change was like a bulldozer through the center of my mind. I don't know the context behind that quote, but it leapt off the screen when I read that. It just resonated with me. So I asked my guests to linger a bit in the space where they made that decision, because I think there's so much rich learnings there. I frame it as the moment in that space that holds a decision as it dangles on the precipice of change. And as you're listening to this, you may be thinking or remembering a time when you stood on that precipice, indecisive and needing some guidance. So being on the precipice of change, that decision point, as I call it, leads me to another origin story. I'm going to share the prequel, if you will, to my story. It begins in India, or thereabouts, because we don't know for sure, when a young woman's decision changed the course of her life. Now, this is a journey story most of us may have in our lineage, the ancestors' voyage from the homeland to a foreign land, driven by the need to survive or taken. In this scene, it was the late 1800s. My paternal great-grandmother was a teenager, barely 5 feet. She's left a husband. It's unknown if there was a child or children also left behind. She traveled alone to a port, boarded a British ship of mostly men and a small percentage of women. Months later, she arrived in Guyana, South America, my homeland, as an indentured laborer and worked on an assigned plantation. She got married. It's rumored that she owned the family property and not her husband. And if that's true, it's highly unusual for a woman at that time. She had 2 children. After her passing, she left the property to her daughter, who in turn would leave it to her youngest child, my father. That's high level because sadly, that's all the facts that we have. And I use air quotes with when I say facts. My father only remembers her as the blind old grandmother. She passed away from old age, taking the details of her story with her to the grave and leaving us in the dark. Her name was Betulia. The gaps in her history haunt me, and I hope I can discover more as this unsung hero deserves her story to be told. I think about that decision point in her story. I call her a hero. What were the circumstances that led her to take such a courageous step? And the word courageous seems grossly underestimated. I liken it to standing in front of pitch darkness, the unknown, right? To look behind you, to look over your shoulder is to see light, the familiar. And yet she chose to take a step forward into assured uncertainty because it was better than being tethered to what she knew. I wouldn't be here, obviously, if it wasn't for that singular decision and her courage to follow through. It gives me tremendous perspective as I think about my own journey and times of discouragement. Of course, one shouldn't compare themselves given historical context, but nevertheless. I will say my lineage of strong trailblazing women is inspiring and has certainly set the foundation and who knows, perhaps even a genetic marker because I do come from a strong line of matriarchs and again, very inspiring lineage. Which brings me back to the intention of this podcast on the theme of inspiration. It's my hope that the stories shared here inform, influence, and inspire your journey wherever you are in the arc. Whether you've heard the call and you're reluctant, or you're standing on the precipice indecisive as to what to do next, or you've taken a step forward and you're learning as you go. There will be a guest on this show whose story may help. I will share my own story, or stories, because of course we have more than one, with each of my guests as these episodes progress. I really want the focus of this podcast to be more about their story. And so I'm going to end it here until next time. Thanks for listening to episode 1. I hope you find the intention of the podcast intriguing and that you'll tune in next Monday when I have my first guest. Please like, follow, share, whatever it is that you do with podcasts, wherever it is that you listen to podcasts. Take care and be well.